Oh, hello there, and welcome to Weekly Lit, episode 32, dealing with Sara Gran's The Book of the Most Precious Substance. I'll tell you right from the beginning, this is my book of the year so far. So, Sara Gran has been a longtime favorite. If you've listened to some of my previous episodes, you've seen or heard me recommend her Claire DeWitt series. I recommend everything she's written, uh, but the Claire DeWitt series in particular, I think, is a really top-notch detective fiction. But although it's much, it goes beyond that, as I like to say, transcends the genre. Uh, she's uh, just got a very unique voice and a great narrative tone, clear writing technique, very good writing style, and so and a great storyteller. So the book of the most precious substance is her first release under her own publishing company, Dream World Books, and the it just came out in March, or end of February, but I've pre-ordered it and have not been disappointed. It took me a little longer to get this episode put together, just being busy with other things. But anyway, the uh, she's Sarah Gran, it's Gran, is one of the authors that I recommend the most to people, and yet I haven't gotten a lot of feedback from folks. I don't know if they're just not familiar with it or they don't take my recommendations credibly, which might be the case, probably. But anyway, I recommend all of her books and without reservation. Now, this one, The Book of the Most Precious Substance, is reminiscent of uh, another novel, Theodore Roszak's Flicker from the 90s. I can't remember if it's 91 or 90 or later, but I think it was the early 90s. Um, in terms of being a story that has some thrilling aspects to it, a little bit of detection, obviously some occult um, aspects to it, and um, where Flicker dealt with the movie industry. The Book of the Most Precious Substance, as you might guess, deals with the book business and antique books, occult books, magic books, and the title book is the subject of an inquiry or search by the lead character, Lily, who is obviously much more in depth than what I'm going to tell you about here, but goes on a search for an occult book that is the best way I can describe it is a very limited edition sex magic book. So right out of the gate, I should say this book may not be for everyone because it's sexually explicit. So if you're offended by that, I will say it's not gratuitous at all. It is integral to the story, but it may not be everyone's cup of tea. But it is certainly not gratuitous. It intertwines with the uh, nature of the story and the temptations that go along with everything. So I know I'm kind of rambling about quite a bit on this, uh, but anyway, the book is the subject of an investigation or searching for by the protagonist, and she has um, a couple of the side characters that work along with her. One in particular, Lucas, who joins in her. They team up to find this, and again starts out with a dead body pretty early on, uh, and it goes from there. So it has many conventional aspects of a mystery novel, um, but but then where it exceeds is that it goes beyond those, and uh, it's so well written. And this is what I keep coming back to with Sarah Gran, is that hear her voice, or you kind of step back and say, "Wow, I see what she's doing here, or how she's handling this," and it can really appreciate it. And I do the same with James Elroy, George Saunders. There's certain authors where you can just see, if you take a step back and see how they're telling the story, you can really appreciate it. It's got even though it is explicit, it really has a moral underpinning to it that, and in some ways, what I would say a very conservative aspect to it in terms of, there's go back to something like Nathaniel Hawthorne, and these morality stories, and how there's things going on underneath underneath the surface of society and so forth. This certainly falls into that category, and the object of the story, the book of the most precious substance, is highly sought after, and it leads to temptation, and so we see how that affects Lily over the course of the novel, and the other characters, and how they either fight or succumb to some temptation, how they seek power, and what the book can gain for them, and at the end, there's also, um, uh, without spoiling anything, I think it's safe to say that the message is that there is always a price to pay, always a price to pay for actions or inactions. So that's a very classical or conservative moral based viewpoint, and so underpinning all of this is, I think, a healthy, valid theme. And then you have the story itself, which is just a fun story. I mean, very entertainingly written, and well constructed, with deep characters. There are certain things that, um, again, where the characters will have these discussions, and oftentimes there's some meaning found in how the discussions take place. If they're having a meal together, what they share, their shared meal is a form of communion, and and how they change over the course of even having a meal and meeting with a new character, or going from certain daily tasks, such as Lily going shopping and deciding to, maybe upgrade her clothing. You see these tools that Gran uses of her change, of Lily changing even her outward appearance, and you just see the transformation of the character taking place over the course of the story. So, from an analytical standpoint, there's just a lot going on there beneath the surface, or you can just read it for the pleasure itself of the story. So, if I think of anything else to add to it, I will. But right now, I'm just going to read a little bit of an excerpt from the very beginning of the book. So this is the first chapter of the book of the most precious substance by Sara Gran. I first heard about the book from Shyman. We were at the big annual book sale in the community college gymnasium on Lexington near Gramercy Park. Most book dealers specialized in an area of study: military history, revolutionary literature, modern first editions. I didn't. I specialized in books that interested me and were profitable. I liked books that were beautiful with unusual bindings or remarkable illustrations. I liked obscure topics, like lesser known religions or forgotten corners of history. I liked books about art. I liked counterculture. On my table at the moment were a dozen books from the 1800s with forgettable words and good bindings priced at $50 each. A few bird and butterfly guides from the same era with original lithographs priced at 200 each. A travelogue written by a Russian visitor to Tibet in 1901, the only copy I had ever seen or heard of, for 500. a little stack of British pulp fiction from the early 40s and 50s, another stack of perverted and wonderful Olympia Press editions in green paper wrappers, no Nabokov or Miller, sadly, the gems of the run, a handful of gossipy out-of-print paperbacks about groupies and musicians I'd found in a thrift shop a few weeks before, a book on Haitian voodoo from the 1930s with remarkable photographs, and a series of letterpressed pamphlets on Southern cooking, published by the Charleston Junior League from the 1930s through the 1960s. My most expensive book was $1,500, a rare and beautiful survey of a little-known Swedish artist named Hannah Klein. My cheapest, the British paperbacks, were $20 each. Business was brisk. It was a week after Valentine's Day. The fair itself was in the exact dead center of the business, in the middle between thrift store dollar paperbacks and seven-figure rarities. It had slowed the week before, and we were all worried the slushy mess outside would slow down sales. But our worries weren't justified. Now we worried about the moisture ruining our books. Book people aren't exactly silver lining types. And then Shyman showed up at my table. "Hey, Lily," he said, "I was looking for you." "Hey," I said, "how's your day going? Selling anything?" Shyman himself looked like the exact dead center of most book dealers. A 50-something man with an irregular hairline and patchy, unbecoming facial hair, clothes that were somehow too big and too small at the same time, and a look on his face like he could very easily be persuaded to sit down and never get up again. Like most book people, there was a shadow in his face, a hollow echo in his laugh that let you know he'd rather be around books than people. Who could blame him? It was why so many of us were in this business. People had let us down. People had broken our hearts. We liked books and animals and messy rooms full of things that weren't people. But you could also see in better moments the man Shyman used to be. Handsome, erudite, a scholar with a beautiful wife and a promising career ahead of him, the promise of which obviously had not come true. Shyman was very good at what he did, which was sell books about military history. As far as I knew, he wasn't really interested in anything else. He had come to the book world through a handful of failed PhD attempts. He ended up with no degree and no job, but with a library of military books that had increased in value threefold since he began graduate school. He lived on Long Island somewhere, not the fancy part. "Yeah," he said, "it's okay. But listen, you know something called pretiosus materia? Something like that?" I thought it was Italian, and I thought he was mispronouncing it. "La pretiosus materia?" I said. Not that I spoke Italian, but I spoke a little French and a little Spanish, and figured it was something like the precious materials. "Latin," he said, "not Italian. The precious substance. You know weird stuff. I thought you might have heard of it." "I don't think so," I said. "Well, if you can find it," he said, "I got someone offering 6 figures for it." "Six figures?" I asked. "High 6 figures," he said. "And I strongly suspect he could go to 7 if he had to. He wants this book. Of course, if you can find it, if I find it," I said, "we share." "If you find it," Shyman went on as if I hadn't spoken, "you or whoever finds it, I'm willing to give 20%. That's fair." 50%, I said. 20, 50, 25, 50, 25. "Okay," I said, 35. "Let's make it interesting," said Shyman. 33%. "If you find the book for me, I buy it for my client. I give you 33% of what I make from it, if I make anything." "Okay," I said, "deal." We shook on it. I needed money. I started that night. So that's chapter one. If that doesn't hook you, I don't know what will. But that's chapter one of the book of the most precious substance by Sara Gran. I highly recommend it. I will qualify it. Again, it is sexually explicit. So if that bothers you, steer clear. I was once in a book club and asked to sort of contribute some ideas of maybe something with a little depth to it. I chose Lolita, and at the very next meeting, was told by a person, and they're perfectly within their rights to do it, that they did not want to be in a book club with anyone who would suggest reading Lolita. So, everybody has their thresholds or things they're willing to undertake. But that being said, unless you are in the anti-Lolita uh, category, if you're an adult, you should be able to handle it. It's a wonderful book, my book of the year so far, and probably ongoing. If you have any questions or comments, comment below, send me an email, weeklylit@gmail.com. I would like to discuss these with anybody who follows through because it's a wonderful book. And again, the Claire DeWitt series, I'll probably do another, I definitely will do another feature on those because it's a great ongoing series in its own right. So, anyway, I hope you enjoyed this. Let me know what you think. Until next time, read harder.